We are Tribbie, the messenger and deliverer of prophecies. We are Trinon, the priest listening to the prophecy. We are Tribios, the holy maiden of Yonisapolis. Please join us on our journey to the end of the west wind, where the flowers bloom. One thing I really loved about 3.1 was the expansion of both Maidios and Tribios' story, their origins, the tragedies that led them to where they are today. And I do want to break down each flame chaser in their own video, and I think a fitting place to start is with the very first Chrysos Heirs, the oldest of all of them, the one that kick-started humanity's fight against the Black Tide by obtaining the core flames of the Titans. The ultimate burden and tragic story. She is an incredibly interesting flame chaser, starting this journey as an adult, now in a much more infant-like state. I want to talk about her mother, why it's no coincidence that the Titan of Passage was the first one inherited, and even some subtle Easter eggs associated with this character. But before we can actually talk about Tribios and all of her incarnations, we actually have to talk about the Titan itself, the very god that she inherited her powers from. Yonis, the Titan of Passage, known as the Mouth of Gate and the Gate of Infinity. Like you all know, there are 12 confirmed Titans. 3 Titans per category, and there are 4 subcategories. The Titan of Passage, along with the Titan of Law and Time, are the 3 Titans of Fate, worshipped in one of the biggest cities of Amphroeus, Yonisapolis, a city that's pretty well no longer inhabited and engulfed in darkness in current game. Most of the characters alive have never even seen this city in its glory, but this Titan knows the existence and destination of all pathways. They govern not only the passages of people and the literal paths they traverse, but also the journeys that bind their fates. And that is what's so interesting about this Titan and Tribios themselves, because this Titan can open the doors to all broken mortal worlds, and even create paths where they don't exist. It's often stated that the 12 Titans kind of resemble the Eons in a lot of ways, because we know Amphroeus is so isolated from the outside worlds. This Titan resembles the Trailblaze Eon Akavili the most, paving the way for unseen and unknown destinations. It is also interesting that Tribios inherited the prophecy from this Titan, since this Titan was the most revered and loved by humanity, and the most willing to guide humans. And something that the game doesn't really tell us a lot of is that Amphroeus and the big cities that we travel to, there are also a lot of smaller towns and villages on the outskirts. This Titan had one of the biggest followings, which is why there was such a massive city worshipping this Titan along with the other 2 Titans of Fate. What I also find incredibly interesting about the Titan of Passage is that they work incredibly close with the Titan of Death, because even the dead must have passage to the afterlife. Another connection to death is the Sea of Flowers, both mentioned by Tribbie's mom and this little cutscene that we got. I don't want to spoil Castrice's leaked gameplay, and I'm not saying this is for sure, but this Sea of Flowers definitely has a correlation with death. We'll talk about that more in the video, because honestly, I think this Sea of Flowers has more than one reference or Easter egg. That is essentially the basics of the Titan of Passage. But what about Tribios' mother, who we got interesting flashbacks? We learned a lot of interesting details from her mother, who was a former maiden of Yonisapolis, but they're very vague on the details of what happened to her. Why was she being prosecuted and chased? What ritual did her mom actually do that prevented her from returning home? We do get a little bit of context on the actual duties and responsibilities of these holy maidens of Yonisapolis and the Titan of Passage. The maidens are the ones that directly communicate with the Titan, but it was also a tradition that if somebody gloriously gave their life and died for destiny, then the maiden would pick a piece of glass from the volcano quarry and polish it. And Tribios, being a young girl, was fascinated by the volcanic glass, and she accidentally smashed it. The reason her mother actually kept it was because the person that died had no family to pass this gem to. Usually it goes to their closest kin or relative, but over time, as the Black Tide became more and more of a threat, the people started to panic, and we get a taste of humanity's dark nature. The game heavily implies that she was assassinated. They talk about how we just need to wait for the ceremony to make a small move. The Rose Merle will slip and fall into the abyss. Giannis is built on a mountainside. There are more than a few cases of people who have lost their footing in history. So in other words, if we take her out, no one will question if she just lost her footing on the mountainside. Planning to select a new puppet to communicate with the Titan and fill the role of Maiden. There are a lot of themes in Amphroeus, even from the opening trailer we got, showing humanity's dark side, the evil of humanity. And with the black tide present in Amphroeus, humanity's greed, desire for power, and bloodlust is only amplified. But why did this happen? This is actually a great source of her nightmare scene that she had earlier on in the quest. But why? Why was she targeted like this? Why was Giannis turning hostile? Well, it all has to do with the black tide. Like discussed many times in Amphroeus, the black tide, much like the Abyss in Genshin Impact, they have the same characteristics. They corrupt, like a virus, like an evil malice, causing people to go mad and commit atrocities. It's no different than what we learned with Mightyos and his family, his father. The black tide fell upon Amphroeus after the black tide easily swept through the smaller villages and towns, like Finon's hometown. It eventually hit the bigger city-states. Giannis prayed to Tribios for a prophecy, but no response came from the Titans. This is precisely why Tribios took matters into her own hands, and we actually get to witness her do this. Tribios' life was in danger, and she was never truly safe, like we already discussed. So she took matters into her own hands, stealing the core flame and claiming the authority of Giannis herself to help lead the people of Amphroeus towards a better tomorrow. In the aftermath of her taking the authority, her soul split into 1,000 pieces, which would travel across Amphroeus to seek out the Chrysos Heirs. And just by looking at some Easter eggs both within her own trailer and where she grew up, it would seem they already suspected of other worlds beyond Amphroeus. We know that Amphroeus is very isolated and it's taboo to learn about the outside world. Both the Elders and the Titans don't like this. It's very much like Teyvat, its own little isolated story and world. But it would seem Tribios and her mother had an inkling, and once gaining the power of passage, like I already said, this Titan had the power to even connect broken worlds, which could actually explain Teyvat being an Easter egg in her trailer. The Titans themselves were referenced to be more similar to an Eon than an Emanator, according to Black Swan. It opens the possibility for a lot of cool theories. Maybe one of the 1,000 fragments of Tribios actually ventured to Teyvat, being the demigod of passage. Teyvat being one of these broken worlds with a false sky plagued by the black tide as well. When she's having the flashback with her mother talks a lot about this oasis, this island, or this world protected without storms or sorrow. If the ritual is successful, you can travel through it. Both the Abyss in Genshin Impact and Amphroeus, the Abyss functions as a malice to corrupt and is a plague to all worlds, but it also functions as a means to travel beyond worlds, which heavily implies that if her mother isn't dead, she ended up in some other world. This is also heavily referenced a lot with Tribios and her whole character. The many Easter eggs with rocket ships. Rocket ships resemble passage, but passage beyond your world. We don't use rocket ships to travel from country to country, it's to leave Earth. That is the entire point. Speaking of countries, a little side note. Are you able to guess what country I'm from? There's a prize in it if you guess right. I will give you 2 toonies and a loonie. That's really not a bad prize, eh? Referencing this sea of flowers, which again gives me a lot of Teyvat vibes. Something very much noted by the travelers when they first traveled to Teyvat from another world. And this protected world she's talking about also again references Teyvat with its false sky, being isolated like this little oasis from the outside world protected by the heavenly principles. The word Teyvat means ark, and Teyvat is often as an isolated bubble world or ark. In the very near future I will cover this exact topic, because they are definitely inching towards these games being connected more and more. As I already touched on in the video, the Sea of Flowers more than likely is resembling death in the afterlife. The Easter eggs with Castryce and her being the shadow of death and associated with the Titan of death, but the Flame Chasers in general are all destined to meet that grim fate to begin with. Their destiny is only death, all but one. So although it is fun to speculate on where the Sea of Flowers actually is, Different theories about passage in other worlds. At the end of the day, more than likely, what they're referring to is the afterlife here, the Sea of Flowers, a place finally free from the Black Tide. But regardless what happened to Tribios' mother, whether she was sacrificed or made it beyond Amphroeus, Tribios would grow up, become an adult, and take on the role of Maiden, and it would seem that she was being targeted all the same, which is that whole sequence that we see, the flashback of her actually stealing the core flame. But it's interesting because we see it through the perspective of how we know Tribios as a infant or young girl, when in fact she is a fully grown adult woman. And when she does inherit that core flame, she breaks down in tears because she realizes the insane burden and tragedy her fate is now intertwined with. It is no coincidence that the Titan of Passage was the first core flame inherited, being the only Chrysos Heirs that knows this grim fate that they all face, and using the powers of passage and the 1,000 fragments of herself to scatter across Amphroeus and seek out the other Chrysos Heirs. Tribios taking it upon herself and her sole mission to fight back against the Black Tide. They also did a very good job with this prophecy of paying respect to the original Flame Chasers of Honkai Impact 3rd. You experience the Flame Chasers in Honkai Impact through a simulated world, a simulated universe known as the Elysian Realm. Simulated versions of the Flame Chasers, because the Flame Chasers actually were alive over 10,000 years ago in the previous era, trying to save humanity from the Honkai. And all of the Flame Chasers were the unsung heroes of that era that all died fighting the good fight. But in the current era of Honkai Impact, there are simulated versions of those characters, and that's how you get to know them. Amphroeus is no different. This prophecy clearly states that at the end of this journey, when the Black Tide is vanquished, only one will be left standing to experience the new era. And I mean, this heavily implies to be Finon to be the last of the Chrysos Heirs still living. Oh, and Kevin Castellano was also one of the Flame Chasers that lived to the current era. Who would have thought, right? Good old Kevin. But to me it also implies that Tribios and her many fragments will be the first to die. A big question raised in 3.1 was how Tribios stayed on this path, taking on this insane burden. How did she never waver over the years? She is vastly older than all other Chrysos Heirs, and knows that she's fated to die, which means that more than likely, she's fated to never get to experience what she talked about with her mother, traveling to these other worlds, free of the Black Tide and the Sea of Flowers. They talk a lot about building a ship and sails and traveling, but she knows that this prophecy has her fated to die. How did she never waver over the years? Well, interestingly enough, even past Tribios knew that her future fragmented self would come back to this moment with us, the Trailblazer and Finon, and actually relive it. We actually aided her in becoming the first demigod. We are solely responsible for starting the entire prophecy's journey of the Flame Chasers, setting the first Chrysos Heirs and prophecy in motion. And she states that it was us and her fragmented future self coming back to this moment that helped her stay the course throughout all of these years. Aglaya, who is also a very old Chrysos Heirs, always refers to Tribbie as teacher. Everyone that's inherited a core flame knows they're fated to die, which is the Flame Chaser way, a moth to the flame. Mightyos and Aglaya even joking about it once Mightyos got his core flame. Him having a response we'd expect from him. Very straightforward. But Aglaya has known Tribbie longer than anyone, and she started out with 1,000 fragments. There are only 3 left. Well, actually, I guess that's 2 now, isn't it?
Walk out the door, you see someone that you know, and they ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
So not only is her time coming to an end, but it's heavily implied that she'll be the first to go. Being the first and original, it makes sense, and Aglaya says even though we've known this for a long time this was coming, it doesn't make it easier. But something I wonder, what actually happens to a core flame once the Chrysos Heirs and demigod perishes? The Chrysos Heirs are prophesied with their golden blood to inherit the power of the Titans. Not just anyone can inherit these powers. Hell, even a Chrysos Heirs themselves can't just inherit any old core flame. They already explored this with Finon trying to inherit Strife. Clearly it was always meant to be Mightyos. So I really wonder what happens Maybe the entire point is to borrow that power temporarily until the Black Tide is defeated, then humanity can govern themselves without titans or gods. Maybe that's what they're going for. But maybe this concept is why the Flame Reaver themselves is trying to inherit those core flames right now, collect them all. Maybe they know something we don't. I just think there's so much interesting parallels when talking about Passage. She was the first to start this journey, slowly uniting all of the prophesized Chrysos Heirs. And in our current game's story, she only has 2 fragments left. The Chrysos Heirs are coming together. Her original mission is almost complete, and it just seems so fitting that she would be the first to die. I'm not saying I like it because I really like this character, but it sort of goes along with her whole story, everything coming full circle, like she says when she starts off on her journey. What actually kickstarted her journey was the end of her journey, coming back to where it all started, guiding herself in a way, with us there to help. More than likely this is representing the afterlife, the safe haven free from the Black Tide, the Sea of Flowers, heaven if you will, where her fragments one by one, reunited with her complete original self. Her original self the first to die when she was split into many fragments, in this paradise. And when her final fragment finally dies, then she'll become whole again as Tribios, fully reunited with her mother. And the entire point of being a flame chaser, whether in Honkai Impact or Honkai Star Rail, the unsung heroes for humanity, but you don't get to witness the aftermath, humanity's triumph, and the happy ending. The flame chasers are that character in the movie that dies so that everyone else gets to live. And if that is the case, and Tribios finally does get to reunite with her mother in paradise, I hope they get to live eternally happy. But if Tribbie's mother did actually make it out of Amphroeus, where do you think she went? I definitely want to expand on this whole Teyvat-Amphroeus connection, and just what that means for the future of these games, but that'll be a topic for its own video. But on that note, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I plan on covering Mightios and Kremnos' history at some point in the future, so stay tuned for that. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.